Hello, and welcome to the Seeds of Tao podcast. We are on episode number 44. This is the People Care World Report, and it's the second one that we've done, and I'm excited to get into this world report because there is so much going on. And, I've been having this image of it's a desktop background that I have, and maybe I should share it, or no, I won't share it, but it's been on my mind for some time because I really think it's just beautiful to watch a thunderstorm roll in. And that's what the image is. And I think of this turbulent time right now and all of the things going on, but there's a lot of change happening, and there is a lot of so much, energy, and you could even say that like a storm, it's got a lot of violence to it, right? And there is so much going on that it can just seem like it's the end of the world. But if you look at it in perspective, or if you look at it as in a more holistic way, that chaotic scene in front of you is actually really quite beautiful. And it's a moment in time that we can see as we can see in so many different ways. But when we look back at it, I'm hoping that we can look back at this time and see a time of great awakening, a time of really truly finding out what is going wrong in this world, and what we can do to make some change. And I'm seeing so much of that happening amongst all the turbulence and craziness and even quite destructive things that are happening in the world, right? We have COVID, we have had these riots going on, but we've also had some great awakenings to the social injustice, the great pains that the black people have had in their lives. And I think there's an awakening. I'm hoping that there's an awakening. I'm seeing it in several of us, and it's been a personal awakening for me to recognize some of these things and try to make some difference, however I can, whether it's just coming to you and expressing the things that I'm learning, or sharing what's happening in the world that is good. Amongst all the bad, there's also the direct opposite. That there's a lot of great good happening, and to be able to recognize that and share that with you guys. So that's what we're going to be talking about here on the People Care World Report. And, give you a little introduction to People Care, because this is only the second People Care World Report. If you're new to permaculture, especially, you might not know that there's 3 ethics that are associated with the permaculture movement, the permaculture principles that also go along with it. And I'm going to just kind of show you, if you really want to read up on this, and there's some great words from David Holmgren here, who really shares the principles and pathways beyond sustainability. And a part of that is 3 core ethics. One of those being people care, another being earth care, and a final one which David points out is fair share, but also several other people are calling it future care, and I like to just combine those as fair share and future care. So those 3 ethics, they actually fit quite well into the 12 permaculture ethics, which are, and I'll just kind of list them off real quick. Observe and interact. Maybe I won't even get into all 12 of them, but catch and store energy, obtain a yield, apply self-regulation and accept feedback, use and value value renewable resources and services, produce no waste, design from patterns to details, integrate rather than segregate, use small and slow solutions, use and value diversity, and use edges and value the marginal. Number 12, creatively use and respond to change. And if we think about the ethics in line with the 12 principles, we can start to see a really amazing way that we as people can use a design philosophy that's very rooted in science. It starts to bridge and I've said this before, it starts to bridge the kind of logical scientific thought that we have with, the heart of why we should be doing this and the purpose for really creating and designing things in such a way that help care for the earth, help care for one another and ourselves, and really care for future generations and fairly distribute and share resources with everybody around the world, and that includes our future generations. So that's how these ethics improve our life and the earth at the same time. And the people care ethic, it fits in quite well with the other two ethics of earth care and fair share / future care, because the earth cares for us, and if we don't care for our earth, then we are unable for the earth to care for us, right? It's a symbiotic relationship, and if we don't care for ourselves, how can we then care for the earth who cares for us, right? And if we don't also care for ourselves enough to bring abundance for those around us, and that includes the future generation, then how are we supposed to then continue to care for the earth? Because the earth is going to be there for our future generations. And these three ethics are in relation to each other, obviously, right? And that's why the people care is so needed, and often very, very much, and unfortunately, overlooked in the permaculture world. We focus in on the tangible sciences and the earth care part of it most of the time, but then forget that we need to care for ourselves in order to care for the earth. And on a personal level, it starts with self-care. And then we also need to get involved in serving our communities and serving our families, which is very much a permaculture principle and ethic to be able to do that, so that we can care for others and care for the earth. Because why in the world would we care for the earth if we can't help each other in line, right? It doesn't make sense that we would save a tree and not save our brother, and care just as much about our brother as we do for our environment, because we care for our environment that we care for our brother, and it's because we care for our brother that we care for our environment. It's all interrelated. We can't segregate one or another. So knowing that, just take maybe a mental check right now of maybe where we're in balance. Maybe our opinions and our actions are too one-sided on a particular view. And I believe that's a good reason for a lot of this miscommunication, for us not really taking a step back and realizing another's point of view, and realizing when our own point of view is out of line, that it's out of balance, and we need to maybe dig a little deeper and understand a little better. So let's talk about some of this ugly stuff that's going on right now. And it's not a pretty sight to be able to witness. I'm not going to show some of this stuff that's been happening, but right around the time, and I'll just go back in time, a month or so. It's been about that since all of this unrest has been happening in the U.S. I know I wear the USA hat all the time. Everybody sees it quite often, but I really do believe in this country, and I really do believe that there's so much good, and that people really believe that too. If from other countries, not all countries see the U.S. in a good light, but there are many countries that do, or many people from other countries, I should say, that do see the U.S. in a good light. And this country is built of immigrants. I am only a second generation U.S. citizen on my dad's side, who is from the Philippines, who came here as a refugee from his country. And to be able to, live in this country, I personally am quite grateful for this country and what it's done for my family, and what opportunity it has given me. And unfortunately, it's not the same opportunity as people that have been born in this country for generations and still have that have colored skin, right? And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but there is a lot of work that has been done already, and we should embrace that and acknowledge that. And I think a lot of us do recognize that, especially those immigrants that come into the country and see just how beautiful this country is. I'm not a big Arnold Schwarzenegger fan, nor am I a huge promoter or demoter of what he has to say. But there was a 4th of July message that he sent out, just kind of rallying people. Like, he was grateful to be in this country as an immigrant, and he saw just how rich the culture was, the immigrant culture was here. Of, we are a melting pot, and that is our culture. It is a culture of multiple cultures, and we come together on it, and it is such a beautiful thing if we recognize that. And to see some of the violence and hate and yuckiness that's going around with those immigrants that are currently coming in or have come in more recently, and all of the stuff going in the current presidential issue and choices of our president that have kind of lit and sparked some of that fire. Some things are really difficult to talk about, and one of these, this is a very dividing language here, but it's all about where everybody else has come from. And to be honest, we are all immigrants in this country. We need to understand that most of us are not indigenous, that we come from a background where we came from here from another country generations ago, or even just a generation ago, like myself, or you are an immigrant. And I think knowing that, and knowing where your culture really comes from in the U.S., you should be and see that recognition and embrace it, because it is so powerful and so amazing to see that wonderful part. But there is a lot of division happening right now, and that's some of the ugly that I'd like to to share and make light in, so that we can make changes towards, right? It has probably caused some of the tensions around some of this violence that is happening in social unrest. But we see these things happening, the riots and this division, and what do we do? Like, it's hard to know what to do when I'm sure most of you have seen the George Floyd video and just how disturbing it was, right? And then you do your own research and you find out your own things, and you probably find out that George had a dark past or a difficult past, and you make your own judgments about him, and maybe you don't see him as the human being that we all are, that we all make bad decisions. And maybe you look at these policemen and you might do the same, right? Depending on how you look at this. But we all need to be able to make our own understanding of these. But is it a balanced understanding? And that's something that I've deeply recognized, that some of the maybe not so ugly but bad things that are happening right now are kind of in line with the ignorance and not really truly taking a moment to understand. And when I say this, it's something that I say almost hesitantly, because I hope it doesn't spark or trigger anybody, because I have witnessed that in these last several days, of people being triggered, overly triggered, without and not being able to come down from that emotional state to be able to think logically and say, maybe I do need to have a better understanding of the other view. And for me, I have been labeled many things, to see people recognize an individual for, or label, I should say, an individual as a extreme leftist or to an extreme right, and then take a really strong stance on one side or the other. In doing so, it's very confusing, and I don't understand if you're going to label someone an extremist and then take another extremist side, right? And it only is causing division, and we're only acting out of a very reactive point of view, because chances are we have been triggered by someone else, and we're taking that emotion and throwing it all the way to the other side and taking a hard stance on the other, and then accusing or trying to put some type of view on the other side. And maybe someone else's expression of the situation is not as leftist or rightist as you think. Maybe it's just a little bit of a misunderstanding, and we need to kind of move towards the other side in order to be able to view, to understand, I should say. And so I would say, if you're being triggered at any point on social or in conversation with friends and family. And this is a very hard time because we can be so divided against our friends and our family because of a stance that they take on something. And it's so not what we need to do. But instead, if we do get triggered and we start to back the other way, that we lean into it a little bit more, that we listen, and really start to have a moment of true communication. Really look into that other person's eyes and see who they are and why they might be saying this, and really try to understand them. And I say this from both sides. For me, I have started to realize that I have been labeled as a leftist or extreme leftist in some cases because of me diving into another side. When in reality, I probably have been historically. I've voted more Republican. I have voted more right side, but I haven't always. I have never. I don't feel been too far onto one side or the other. But then to be labeled it is kind of a hard thing. Let's look at that and say let's step into the other side and let's try to understand it, and maybe even share some of our opposing belief, our newfound understanding that we get from diving into another understanding. And so a lot of the research that I'm going to talk about today and the stances I'm going to be sharing are from an opposing side, or I should even say opposing side, but on a side that I do not have a lot of understanding on. And I shouldn't, there shouldn't be an opposing side, maybe a misunderstanding side or something I don't quite understand. And that's what I'm trying to more fully understand. And so I actually did some of my own learning, because in reality, one of the big things that I recognized in myself is that I didn't know what this whole Black Lives Matter movement was, and these campaigns going around were, because I frankly did not take the time to understand. And I immediately started to recognize some imbalances. Oh, I shouldn't say immediately. It was a gradual thing, right? And these problems have really shown me and led me to a book called White Fragility, and I want to mention that right now. And I'm going to just move to my cam here, and so you can see this. This is what the book looks like right here, and it's by, I'm covering up the author, but it's by Robin DiAngelo, who is white, and I don't know if she has any other background, or she comes from another descent as well, but she looks white, right? And her talk here is why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. And I actually was only able to read a bit, and this is something that I'm recognizing as one of the most or the biggest problems that we're having right now with all of this social unrest and us not being able to make change with it, is because of this concept of white fragility. This and I'll talk about it. What I've learned, and I've only been able to, and I should mention this before I get into it, been able to read the Blinkist version of White Fragility. So it's a book report on this, right? And get an understanding of it. If you're unfamiliar with Blinkist, it's a really cool app that you can read condensed versions of the book and get a good understanding of it. I have the book now, and I want to dive deeper into it as I have greater time to do that and time to dedicate to it. So I say this from that point of view, but have done my research, right? And what I am understanding here, that to understand race, there you have to really ask the question, what does the construct serve? And that's what Robin is talking about here. We got to really understand what racism serves. It does. It has a purpose, right? And it's to delineate one group from another to have power over the other. And racism really is, whether it's systemic racism or blatant racism from an individual, has to be defined in a certain way that you have to have power over the other. So it's not necessarily racism when a black person is saying, you know, that it's not racism when a black person actually calls out a white person or calls a white person hateful names and those types of things and discriminates. And that's really what it is. It's discrimination and it's persecution, not racism. Because racism can only exist when there's power over another individual. And to be honest, and this is the sad fact, that blacks don't have that same type of power that a white person does. If a white person were to say, this black man is chasing me, and it was a completely faulty thing, and this black man is being intimidating, that white person has more power when they say that out loud in public or to an officer because of the systemic racism that has been placed. And this is a very triggering moment as I say this. So I'm asking for a moment to reflect on this and to not allow your emotions to spark up, especially if you are of white descent. And I say this because that is, if you're feeling that, that is white fragility. And I have felt that. I am a quarter Asian, mostly white, mostly if I'm in a very melting pot area, I am considered white. I am only looked at as white. And I have embraced that most of my life. And I have no idea what it is like to live a black man's life in a very inner city area. And I can't say that I've been in any sort of situation, because I've lived in white suburbia and I've grown up largely white. And that is the truth of it, right? And I have been triggered when someone says that there is systemic racism, that this country has been raised up in racism, and that it has affected us generationally. And that has triggered me emotionally, because what happens is we don't want to be termed bad, and racism is bad. And when we are on the white side and someone says your country is racist, and you are white, you determine and label yourself bad because, and what does that do? What does that trigger? Well, it triggers all these emotions. And if I'm going to go the opposite way, you're going to say, I'm not bad, right? And I'm white and I'm not bad. It's not to label you. It's to understand what is happening. And so when someone brings up this conversation, we need to be and have enough emotional intelligence to understand where it's coming from, and that no one is labeling you, or if someone is labeling you, not to take offense and be uncomfortable in that position. Be uncomfortable being, be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? Because it's going to trigger you, and we need to not let it trigger us to see what's actually happening in this nation. That generationally, we can see, we only can go back a few generations and run into deep, deep racism. And to think that that has not affected the generations today, the generation today, and the generations that follow, is to be completely ignorant and to allow the emotions to completely overwhelm us and ignore the blatant truths that are out there. And that's why I bring up this white fragility. It is something that is deeply happening. When I posted and shared this little, I saw this and I was like, wow, someone shared this with me. And I'm like, this is an amazing list of books that will help me to understand. And I was trying to search for this. And I'll say this because I love my friends and my family that are on Facebook. But when I reposted this, I didn't get the best responses back to it. I did get some good responses, but I thought, hey, we could all learn a little bit more, right? And learn the other side a little bit more, especially if we don't come from this background. And you can see here, this is a great resource. I actually pulled this book and started reading it, and understanding the concepts from this anti-racist lit starter kit. And it was revealing to me as I started to dive into some of these books how unaware I was, right, of another point of view that is just as true as mine, right? And because I can't see that point of view, because I did not grow up in that light, it takes great diving into an understanding, right? And it's very uncomfortable to even talk about these things. So when I say this, that is what's coming up. That is this thing that we're seeing and recognizing as white fragility. And so I say this because we need to recognize it, and it's time for us to really, only a white individual can do the work to have that mindset change and to be emotionally aware of another that is completely different than them. And it goes on the other side. Only a black person can be emotionally aware enough to understand a white person and their upbringing and why they would have white fragility, and when everybody is essentially calling them bad, right? And what that would trigger in someone when they don't feel bad, but everybody's saying they are bad in a sense because, or labeling them bad because of what past generations have done, right? And that triggers people. So to bring those emotions down and to really start to understand it comes logic, comes understanding, comes educating yourself, and that is what I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to trigger anybody. I'm trying to do the opposite. And though it is a very raw subject that might be happening, and this is what I'm labeling it as. It's white fragility in most cases. Why we can't come to the grips with this information. So, knowing that there is a lot of good that is this happening out there, and a lot of good emotional intelligence that I wanted to share. And this little clip, it's now a little old. I mean, it's from a month ago, essentially, if you're looking over here. But I'm going to play it real quick. And
not all of the action around the country.
I'm going to play it real quick, and we're going to just hear how, maybe I'll even turn down this volume here because that was really loud. Hopefully it's not blasting you. So we're going to just hear some of the good that's happening, right?
Country has been destructive. There have been plenty of instances in which regular folks have stepped up to protect businesses, stop looting, and even come to the aid of police officers. And more than once around the country, law enforcement made clear they sympathize with the protesters.
Across the nation, we're seeing police officers doing what they can to ease the tension, offering gestures of reconciliation. After this remarkable moment outside a police station in Des Moines, the protesters walked away peacefully. We spoke to Flint, Michigan Sheriff Chris Swanson, who has become a symbol of healing after he spontaneously laid down his riot gear.
I took my helmet off and laid the batons down. I want to make this a parade, not a protest.
You just saw tension just get relieved, and the righteous anger and the protest of people was legitimized because somebody listened to what they said.
We're seeing acts of courage from some protesters. In Louisville, these men linked arms to protect a police officer who got separated from his squad. Outnumbered and surrounded, you can see the concern on his face, but he's shielded until he can get to safety. This guy was breaking chunks out of a sidewalk in the nation's capital when protesters turned on him and handed him over to the cops. And in Los Angeles,
this is not a black woman who's putting Black Lives Matter.
She tried to stop two women from defacing a Starbucks.
Don't spray stuff out here when they gonna blame black people for this, and black people didn't do it.
Standing up for what's right as chaos grips the nation.
You know, it is... Oh. And there you go. You can see what I've been looking at and shopping for. There is so much good going on. And though there is some big differences, and I mentioned, that scene, if you're looking at a thunderstorm and you're watching it roll in, and there's so much violence and so much energy going around, and you just kind of step back and look at it, even when you're in that storm and you can see that there's beauty in it as well, there is so much good and beauty, and some of that energy is really good. So there is the ugly, there is the riots, there's all of these social injustice, there's cops that are not doing their duty in the right way, that have maybe chips on their shoulder, whatever it is, there's some bad things happening in this world, but there's also great good, and there's this great. I'm also going to show this because it's really quite beautiful, and if you have a family, I really like the way he does his little thoughts. I think he has, but it's tomfoolery. If you've seen this already, it's good to watch it again. Really just shares that we are having an awakening here, and he calls it the Great Realization. I'm calling it an awakening, and it is a moment for us to kind of step into who we are and make some different changes, needed changes. So here we go. I'm going to play this.
Tell me the one about the virus again, then I'll go to bed.
But my boy, you're growing weary, sleepy thoughts about your head.
Please, that one's my favourite. I promise just once more.
Okay, snuggle down, my boy, though I know you know full well. The story starts before then, in a world I once would dwell. It was a world of waste and wonder, of poverty and plenty, back before we understood why hindsight's 2020. You see, the people came up with companies to trade across all lands, but they swelled and got much bigger than we ever could have planned. We'd always had our wants, but now it got so quick. You could have anything you dreamed of in a day, and with a click. We noticed families had stopped talking. That's not to say they never spoke, but the meaning must have melted, and the work-life balance broke. and the children's eyes grew squarer, and every toddler had a phone. They filtered out the imperfections, but amidst the noise, they felt alone. And every day the skies grew thicker, till you couldn't see the stars. So we flew in planes to find them, while down below, we filled our cars. We'd drive around all day in circles. We'd forgotten how to run. We swapped the grass for tarmac, shrunk the parks till there were none. We filled the sea with plastic, because our waste was never capped, until each day when you went fishing, you'd pull them out, already wrapped. And while we drank and smoked and gambled, our leaders taught us why. It's best to not upset the lobbies. More convenient to die. But then in 2020, a new virus came our way. The governments reacted and told us all to hide away. But while we all were hidden, amidst the fear and all the while, the people dusted off their instincts. They remembered how to smile. They started clapping to say thank you and calling up their mums. And while the car keys gathered dust, they would look forward to their runs. And with the skies less full of voyagers, the earth began to breathe, and the beaches bore new wildlife that scuttled off into the seas. Some people started dancing, some were singing, some were baking. We'd grown so used to bad news, but some good news was in the making. And so when we found the cure, and were allowed to go outside, we all preferred the world we found to the one we'd left behind. Old habits became extinct, and they made way for the new, and every simple act of kindness was now given its due.
But why did it take a virus to bring the people back together?
Well, sometimes you've got to get sick, my boy, before you start feeling better. Now lie down and dream of tomorrow, and all the things that we can do. And who knows, if you dream hard enough, maybe some of them will come true. We now call it the Great Realization. And yes, since then there have been many. But that's the story of how it started, and why hindsight's 2020.
Because if you look at the camera, they know someone's filming it because they can see you.
Exactly. If you look at the camera, they...
Okay. So, I'm sorry there. I forgot to do something, which was change my camera screen. So if you are viewing this on YouTube, you only saw the last little bit. But if you're just listening to that, what a great little poem, right? What a great spoken word poem that we just listened there of this awakening, this realization that hindsight is 2020. And when we look past on this year, 2020, and we see all of the turbulence in this storm, and we saw it roll over us, and we got a chance to really truly figure out what it is to be human and to care for people in this turbulent time. And we humbled ourselves, not to be triggered, but to really, really, truly understand what's going on in this world. I think we will have a blessed life after seeing all of this go down and roll over us, and we'll be able to have greater joy. So, I was going to go into a few other things here, but maybe I'll just bring them up, because in a very short manner, and let you do your own research on this, because I think this is a good place to end this podcast episode. But the call to action that I would like to share here is, let's all gain a little bit of an understanding here. I mentioned, and I'll share this in the blog post, those books that we can get into, right? That we can take a look at. And I mentioned being able to learn about the Black Lives Matter movement. I think those are really great starter points for us to dive into a side that we don't really truly understand, to look into some of this literature. I'll share this link with you. I'll also share this link with you where we can understand what the Black Lives Matter syllabus is, learn what they're actually out there talking and trying to help others to understand. And you might just realize that this is not a movement to have blacks higher than another. It's to have them equal, that their hand is not up there. I saw this little meme of, what some people think Black Lives Matter, and there's all of these different skin tones at a lower level than the black hand. And then what Black Lives really matters is that we're all equal, that we're all in there saying and standing up for what we need to have, which is equality. And that's what the Black Lives Matter is, because we have not had that there is systemic racism. And let's understand that. Let's understand what the Black Lives Matter movement is and what it's all about before we just go out there and say what we think it is, right? Another thing that I think we should really take action on is learn to communicate. And, something that I've been diving into is NVC, which is nonviolent communication. There's some courses on it. If you are looking to go out and protest nonviolently, this is there's Marshall Rosenberg wrote a book on nonviolent communication that really took what Gandhi and Martin Luther King and some of these great leaders, social leaders, have done in their own campaigns and efforts, and put it together. And it really does start with self-love, so that we can understand and have empathy towards others. And see, look at here, and self-compassion. You gotta have open-hearted living, expressing from the heart, receiving with compassion, prioritizing your connection, and moving beyond right and wrong to using needs-based assessments. There can be disagreement, but let's move beyond your right, your wrong. Let's look at the right in both stances and really try to understand and communicate more fully. Make a choice, choose responsibility and peace, taking responsibility of our own feelings. These are all very common things that will help us to communicate better. And let's learn to communicate. And this is a great tool for us, is the NVC, nonviolent communication methodologies. So last thing that I want to mention here, let's go out and serve. And there is a Slack community that we can chat, we can conversate on these topics. But also I want to mention that there's a lot of people doing some really awesome projects out there, and they're trying to move these things forward. And if you want to move something forward and want to get involved, a great way that you can is join our Slack community. Get on there. And we're actually, for those working on regenerative and permaculture projects, we're doing a mastermind conversation weekly on Thursdays. It's at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, so whatever that equates to on your time. We're also recording these, but what we're doing is we're helping people move forward on their projects. We're highlighting their project. They get to present that project, and then if you would like, you present your project, and then you step back and you let your peers help you through the challenges and obstacles and objectives that you're trying to accomplish. And so it's a peer-to-peer learning tool that we've created on a weekly basis, and we're calling these the MOKR masterminds. MOKR standing for Mission Objective Key Result, which is a really cool tool that we're using to help us frame our current mission and the objectives that we're having around that mission, and the key results that determine whether or not we meet that objective and are working on our mission. And then we share that with an individual or with the group, and mastermind how we can accomplish those objectives and accomplish our mission. So go out there, do some good. This is a tool that you can use, which is the Slack community and this peer-to-peer help. I give you a little bit of an introduction of what the Slack community is going on, but you'll be put into our calendar so you can see these weekly events. We also put in events from the Global Regenerative Collab and some other friends and partners that are working on things. We have a weekly networking event that the GRC and other people are hosting, as well as the Seeds of Tao is helping to host. And we have a really awesome weekly conversation on the permaculture principles that Garden Jane is hosting, who has also been on our show. And I believe that's on Tuesdays. But you can see that in our calendar, see those events happening, get involved, and take action. It all starts with us getting out there and understanding one another, communicating, and getting to work. So 3 big takeaways that I hope that you get from this episode. Glad to have you here today, and looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. Bye for now. Please, join us on the podcast next time. Rate us, review us on Stitcher and Apple Podcast and wherever else you can. And thank you for listening to another episode of the Seeds of Tao podcast. Bye for now.